Scott McAulay from the Anthropocene Architecture School, who's going to take you on a little journey and then host a wonderful panel doing incredible work. Thank you, Scott.
Absolute pleasure. So thank you very, very much for having me. So to kind of preface what I'm going to talk about is that when it comes to technical solutions for retrofit, we have nailed it. We can do everything we need to. You've seen incredible things all day. But at the same time, what's holding that back is not a lack of solutions, it's a lack of political action. It's a lack of a political will to put lives before profit. So we're going to go through what the built environment and housing look like during a climate crisis. And then we're going to welcome our panel, and we're going to be talking about resistance and mobilization, and also building generative infrastructures. So we do need incredible resistance to the practices taking place, because I'm going to say something controversial. Our housing system is not broken. It was designed to work that way, and it's working incredibly effectively. It is literally killing people. So that is the preface. There's everything we need to do can be done and would transform the lives of millions of people if we did it with care at the center. But the thing is, we live in a profound culture of uncare where it's totally normal to disregard the well-being of the environment and of other people. So does the clicker work? We've now found out. Yes, it does. So to kind of open up, there's this one quote from McAulay that I've not been able to erase from my brain for about 5 years. So it just so happens that we are all alive at the last possible moment when changing course can mean saving lives on a truly unimaginable scale. So again, this is not just about budgets. This is not just about carbon. This is about lives and us playing our part globally and putting climate justice at the heart of it, because we've already overshot our fair share. So, oh, we've gone the wrong way. We're off to a good start. So, oh, we've gone really far. Shit. Okay, so now this is my I am very qualified slide. So my name is Scott, I use he and they. I run the Anthropocene Architecture School and practice for a company called Archetype. I work typically in built environment. I've taught at 20 plus universities from UC Berkeley to Toronto. I've taught people in Australia, and I've taught over 100 times. I've also worked on over a dozen life cycle analysis projects. I do the embodied carbon stuff that should be normal but still isn't, and kind of retrofit. But my kind of why of what got me into this was not our education system, because our education system is fundamentally failing future practitioners. So these images are where I got my true education, so on construction sites with people getting their hands dirty, doing the work of building sustainable buildings. I helped to found ACAN Scotland. I'm a co-producer of Scotland's Architecture Fringe, and I'm an active member of Living Rent. So Living Rent are Scotland's tenants union, and I do lots of kind of logistical support around retrofit and buildings for that. So my practice is quite broad and varied, but it's all about taking the climate crisis seriously at every single stage. So just to give you, I'm actually qualified and to quell the fears of people in traditional construction. So this is what my kind of work tends to look like. I create spaces for people to take climate change seriously and to teach our future practitioners, our local communities, our tenants unions, our local authorities occasionally, that the house is on fire. And that if we don't act like that, we are not going to hit any of the targets we need to, because our targets are lackluster and a bit shy anyway. So from the top kind of left-hand side, I founded the Anthropocene Architecture School as a provocation at Scotland's Architecture Fringe, and since have kind of taught and lectured over 100 times kind of internationally. And that's hosting workshops, everything from slightly traditional studios where you've stripped out the toxic culture of architecture school, to requesting the consent of residents currently fighting off demolition. So the bottom left-hand side was when some students from the University of Sheffield came to see the Wynford Towers in Glasgow that Scotland's biggest social landlord wants to demolish, because their track record is demolishing 17,000 homes and building 3,000. So they're not really a social landlord. The middle was unlearning powerlessness. So a big part of my work is we're not going to hit our climate targets by just learning new things. Our culture has embedded very toxic, extractive, oppressive, supremacist practices that we need to unlearn if we are going to do this equitably. So this was just the kind of closing panel. So Tom is in the room, but I won't point and embarrass him. We had Phoebe Plummer from Just Stop Oil, who wasn't allowed to be in the room because art galleries were in their bail conditions. Morgan Troland, who is an structural engineer currently who's held as a political prisoner, dialed in from his current place of residence. And we also had representation from UVW-SAW from ASCA and It's Freezing in LA from Martha, as well. And then in the I am qualified, I promise, I was also asked to go to the EU to talk during European Sustainable Energy Week about architecture for a just transition. So I've done the traditional-ish stuff, and I do the stuff about moving us along as fast as possible as well. Is that going to work? But at the same time, we cannot talk about housing without talking about climate. So this was part of COP26, where many people in the room perhaps came to my home city as the COP process turned it into a greenwash circus for 2 weeks. So this was part of a demand from Living Rent to tie rent controls to energy efficiency, because all of the policy things we are being offered are simply not good enough. And lots of them have been scrapped as well, so we're actually not moving forwards at a time when we urgently have to. But this is just lots of the biggest wins in my home country have been from collectivized action and union organizing. So if we are going to tackle the housing crisis, it's not going to come from government. There's nobody coming to save us. We have seen that this week. We've seen Rosebank given the go-ahead, which is an act of ecocide, of intergenerational violence, and of climate colonialism. So we can't mince our words about this. We have to be honest about what is happening. So I am not going to soften what I say. I will be polite as I say it if I try, but I'm not going to dodge that bullet in the slightest. So this was just the end of a big part of my work is about unlearning. So that the idea of unlearning these systems, practices, socialized norms that we are perpetuating an economic system that sacrifices land, lives, and communities for the continuation of a small number of people to make profit. So this was everything from getting students to build things, to playing a ridiculously large board game, to the panel that you can see as well. So that's just a little bit of this is what the work I do looks like. But to bring it back, Dr. Sally Weintraub described where we are we're within a culture of uncare. So neoliberalism has hollowed out our care and compassion for one another. And this impacts policy, politics, everything at every single level of how industry works. So every time probably the best way I can describe it is an example of I was walking home from work in Glasgow, and everyone was walking past someone on the street begging. But when someone who wasn't homeless fell over, 12 people ran to their aid. So we are socially conditioned to not care and to normalize that and to suppress that as part of the cognitive dissonance around climate change. So this culture of uncare manifests in the built environment more powerfully than any other example I can use. So we'll just get stuck into that if the clicker plays ball. So we saw last winter over 11,000 people died due to fuel poverty. Fuel poverty is not an inevitable outcome of housing. It's an inevitable outcome of a housing system that's putting profit before maintaining homes. So in our housing system, there is no legal minimum to proactively survey and to make sure homes are actually energy efficient. They've actually scrapped loads of the impending obligations on landlords to change this. So 11,000 people died, and our country continued on as if that did not happen. There was no emergency meeting in Parliament. There was not mass shutdowns of cities. That is this is our culture. These things happen, and we split them into a part of our head, and we don't think about them. But this is something that if we are going to achieve the kind of transformations that we need to unlearn that cognitive dissonance and to look at this for what it is. Because every time I tried to write this talk this week, Rishi Sunak did something fucking mental. So this is number one. So Rishi Sunak decided that on the same day as he was going to cut inheritance tax, he was going to disband our energy efficiency task force that was 6 months old. Our political system allowed an unelected millionaire to disband our energy efficiency task force with no checks, no balances, no voting at all. That can happen because our political system does not have care at its heart and soul. Neither does our housing system. So this is number one of the things that happened whilst I tried to write this presentation. Right, and we got the next one. At the same time, so before they got even worse, it was calculated that the Great British Insulation Scheme was going to take 300 years to do its job. That is, why is that acceptable? This was put forward to government, and there was not massive challenge from the opposition, who failed to be an opposition. But this is the level of ambition of our government to take care of its citizens during a climate crisis currently killing people in other countries. This is a culture of uncare, because if it's put forward it takes 300 years, This is alongside a net zero strategy that was successfully taken to court for being inadequate. So not only is our net zero strategy so bad it fails in a court of law, it would take 300 years of the bar being on the floor for us to actually hit any targets. And those targets are not good enough. And then we move on to the next one. So we were going to have targets for landlords. And the private rental sector came up. So in our culture of uncare, it's been welcomed, there's been a rollback of installation kind of obligations of landlords. So it's been calculated in the next 10 years, everyone here who's renting, collectively as a country, we're going to pay 8 to 10 billion pounds more in heating bills. Again, this is to benefit landlords. This is neoliberal capitalism shaping our housing system. Housing system ain't broke, it's working as intended. Again, this is a culture of uncare. But just to prefix, in that culture, in the construction industry, we care about quite selective things. So lots of the industry turned up as allies to protect this Marks and Spencer's building from being demolished. And that's a good thing, but that's very, very, very rare. So on the right-hand side, we have the Windford Towers. 600 social homes that could be very easily retrofitted are going to be demolished. But they're not going to be demolished in the way you might be used to them. These are all going to be blown up and are all full of asbestos and other chemicals that have not been disclosed. So in today's culture, that is seen as regeneration. Again, the cognitive dissonance in our heads, we see that and we put that somewhere else. And then we go about our day, our 9 to 5, and we just ignore that this is an environmental crime. And also, the housing lists in Glasgow are into the tens of thousands. Thousands of people need a home, and yet it's been given planning permission to blow up 600 of them. And that's only one estate with things about to be blown up on it. And there's no outrage from the architectural press. We get a couple of articles when they feel generous to us. But where is the construction industry standing up for people's homes and actually taking action to say this is not ethically acceptable? It's non-existent. So I put out a bit of an invitation to the Scottish construction industry and said, please turn up for us because we need you. Nobody turned up. The speakers turned up. Nobody else turned up. We had three of us from ACAN Scotland and some speakers. So there's a huge level of cognitive dissonance between people who will proudly proclaim that they are all for retrofit and turning up on the streets to getting in the way of demolition equipment to say, this cannot happen. We are in a culture of profound and deeply disturbing uncare. This will get good towards the end, I promise. So it's also been worked out the impact this housing system has on the NHS. So we basically pay about 40% of all the money we spend on healthcare comes from our buildings. But £1.4 billion is directly attributable to poor housing. And it's been calculated that if we were to do all the retrofit we need to do, it would pay for itself in 1 year. So that's on the table. Our government know this. There's nothing about this in the political conversation. We have the solutions. We know what's doing us harm. We know that people are vulnerable. We know there is a climate crisis. But we're ignoring that if we retrofitted all the homes we need to retrofit overnight, which is physically impossible, but just theoretically, it would pay for itself in 1 year. Your politicians could make this happen if they cared, if they were not lobbied excessively and were just doing things for people to make profit. But this is the level of the solution we have in retrofit. We could be radically reducing the strain on the NHS if we were to take retrofit seriously. But politically, we're not in the slightest. So 8% is a pretty big number. So 8% of homes in England were affected by fire concerns, all brought to light by the Grenfell Tower disaster. Grenfell is not an anomaly. It is simply what happens when our system of profound uncare results in when everything lines up for a tragedy to happen. There are dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of blocks of flats around the country where this could happen again, and it's being overlooked. And again, cognitive dissonance. When was the last emergency housing meeting to strip flammable cladding off of buildings? There hasn't been one. We don't have a national programme for getting this done at speed. So 8% of homes in the UK. So you might wonder, what does that look like graphically? So every single square on the screen represents 20,000 flats that were, these had fire concerns. But we can now, if we move along, we can see what the legacy of a conservative and neoliberal government is. So we have had, of those 2.3 million flats, 342,000 are still known as dangerous. Nothing is happening to speed this up. So 342,000 flats, that is 635,000 people whose daily existence is stressed, is worried, is concerned. They know that they live in a fire risk, and our government is not coming to help them. And then we look at how many they've fixed. So we had 4.2 million problems, right? Well, 2.3 number. We fixed 32,000. We have had years, half a decade, to start fixing this problem, and the government simply has not tried. But again, where is the opposition? When was the last time an opposition party stood up and demanded that we need justice for Grenfell now? We need justice for every single person at risk in a building that is a fire risk now. I don't see hands. So this is where we are. This is what our construction industry and housing system looks like. It's not comfortable, and I fully appreciate that. But this is what we need to look at if we're going to talk about the scale of transformation that we need to see. So there was an incredible book written about this. So Peter Apps is a journalist from Inside Housing who wrote a book titled after what a government official is, we'll say alleged because it was multiple times. The book is called Show Me the Bodies. So I'll just read you a quick passage. The world is getting hotter. Hot summer days provide perfect conditions for fires. There will be more to come. And despite everything we have seen and all the suffering at Grenfell Tower, it remains entirely possible that we will once more witness the terrifying sight of a building consumed by fire with people trapped inside. Government officials are alleged to have said, "Show me the bodies." They have seen them now, and still we have not changed. That is what our housing system looks like. That is the harsh reality of where we are, and we have every right to be absolutely outraged, because not one of our neighbours deserves to be treated like this. Not one person, one living soul deserves to be treated like this, and this is where we are. This is the truth we need to look at. This is the cognitive dissonance we need to address, because if we don't, it's not going to change. We are getting incremental solutions for a fatal problem. You don't incrementally treat something that is terminal. That is where we are. And again, when we look at the kind of predictions for climate change and how much the world is going to heat up, people born today are going to see a radically different future than the one everyone in this room saw when they grew up. It's going to get significantly hotter, but it's all about what we do now. Every action we take today is a fraction of a degree that is not killing someone else somewhere else in the world. It's a tornado that is not as strong. It is flood, it's tidal, it's the coastline taking longer to move, so we have time to prepare. If we do not do things now, things are going to get significantly worse. But we have known this for decades. This is the IPCC's report, and we know that if we don't do anything right now, things are going to get significantly worse. And just to kind of probably paraphrase, everyone's probably heard the 40% numbers, but 39% of all of the carbon emitted as a planet comes from the construction industry and the operation of buildings. 39%. And 1/3 of all the energy that we use as a civilization is used in buildings. We also know that 40 to 70% of all the energy we use as a civilization is wasted through inefficient energy systems. So we have the capacity to reduce that 1/3 by 40 to 70%, and governments are not enacting it, even though we have the solutions. Profound culture of uncare. But just to stress the positive impact that people working in the built environment can actually have. So on this far left-hand side, if I'm reading it properly, the embodied carbon for large projects is about 2,500 tonnes. So that's 196 times bigger than the impact of us as citizens in the UK. But we also need to recognise the climate justice element of this. So in the UK, our carbon footprint is 6 times what the IPCC has recommended for us to stay below 1.5 degrees. We are overshooting that by 6 times on average. But just to point out for fun, there is not enough space on this screen to show the carbon impact of one billionaire. And their impact is over 1 million times bigger than the average person globally. So we need to start talking about wealth taxes, we need to start talking about tax, we need to start talking about closing tax havens, UBI, and we need to talk about the impacts that we have in the workplace. So again, without this, we are not going to move very fast. But we're going to get to a happier occasion. So this is part of my why. So when I was in architecture school in 2016, I was not being taught to design sustainable buildings. But I was really lucky. So you might have seen Alex Barrow, who might still be in the room. Alex was teaching how to build hempcrete buildings, so I went to learn with Alex, and there was no projects in Scotland, so I couldn't learn in my own country. Alex had a project with a couple doing a self-build in Le Contamino Montjoly in the French Alps. So I got to learn on this regenerative and incredibly non-hierarchical construction site, where I got to learn from environmental engineers, people who've been doing lime plastering in their family for 400 years, and from people who are doing incredible things, but also seeing what is possible when you care. How you can organize construction, how you can build things, how every single person has something they can share with someone else. But I'm also going to use this as an opportunity to invite every single person in this room who works around buildings. I want you to start thinking back to the very first building you were ever involved with, and to start thinking, what size was that building? Because the impact we have as individuals is important and we cannot overlook. So something that Morgan, who is currently in prison at the moment, Morgan Troland, told me was one of the things that pushed him into taking direct action was sitting back and calculating how big an impact had his work as a structural engineer had on the climate crisis. So in honour of Morgan, I've decided to calculate the entire square meterage of every single building I've ever worked on in the past 5 to 7 years. I have no idea, the time blurs. So from where we are sitting right now, you have to walk half a kilometre in every single direction to get outside of the square meterage I've worked on as one person. I am one person in the construction industry, and I've worked on 0.23 kilometres of buildings. So I do work in the life cycle analysis, so I am part of the damage control that makes those not so bad. But every single person in construction should sit for just 5 minutes and try to think about how much have you built. And I'm not saying this as a guilt thing, I'm saying this about mobilization, I'm saying this about caring. Just to sit and be really honest with yourself. Am I making the problem worse in my current stream of work, and how can I change that? If I cannot change that, should I change course, and should I change the place of work? Or we can go to, should I unionize with my colleagues and withdraw our consent from doing that project? Because that's something that all of us working in the sector can do. We need to withdraw our consent from doing harm. And then we've got more fun ones. So on the left-hand side, all of those circles, the lower those numbers are, the more energy efficient the building is. So this includes getting up and running around. So the passive house standard is on this side. So just for kind of communication's sake, we're just going to call these units. So the more units that this building has, the less energy efficient it is. So passive house was developed in the 90s in Germany, and is 15 units. So for 30 years in Germany, they've been building incredibly efficient homes. So the typical new build home in the UK is between 80 and 90. So we are 30 years behind the curve of what we could be doing. And that's in our policy, that's in regulations. We are doing avoidable harm every single time we build a new home, and we have been for 30 years. That is the reality of our construction industry and the sector, and it's very hard to sit with, especially if you've worked in construction. It is very difficult, but it's something that we need to sit with that discomfort and lean into that if we are going to move forwards. Big numbers again, 50,000. So we've got a growing and relentlessly growing appetite for demolition in the UK. Every year we demolish 50,000 buildings. That translates to 1 every 10 minutes. So in the time that I've been speaking to you, we've hypothetically lost 2 buildings that could have been retrofitted and people could be living in. And again, this is through all manner of reasons, but at the same time, if you're putting the environmental goods of a planet before profit, this number would not be so high. Then we move on again, and 1%. Why have I said 1%? I said 1% because of every single material that we put into a building in Northwest Europe, we recycle 1% of it. So 99% of that 50,000 number goes into landfill. That's, again, a culture of profound and disturbing uncare. We waste 99% of what we put in buildings. There's been no emergency debates in the EU about this. There's been no emergency debates in Westminster. Surprise, a fucking prize. But at the same time, we know how to do this. We've been building buildings since thousands of years ago, and they've been lasting hundreds of years. Why do buildings only last 30 years now? Neoliberal capitalism is the elephant in the room we've not talked about yet. And then we come to the one slide I really want everyone to remember, because this is significantly important when we talk about justice. So when we get to 2026, the EU 27 and UK construction sector has used up its 1.5 degrees carbon budget. So in less than 1,000 days, we've used up our fair share of carbon for the world to stay below 1.5 degrees. To say this in very, very, very blunt terms, everything we do beyond that is essentially we are reenacting colonialism on other countries. We are taking their fair share. And again, this has not been, it's not the headlines of any construction magazine, no architectural journals, there's no panic. But our carbon budget for doing what is fair and what is just is going to disappear in 1,000 days, less than 1,000 days. And we're going to surpass the 2 degree by 2030. So all of this net zero by 2050 is pie in the sky and ridiculous, because what we need to do now, or we are taking from other countries who are not, they are not underdeveloped countries, they are post-colonial countries. This is a legacy of imperialism, and it's a legacy of white supremacy. And we need to talk to that now. We cannot ignore this. So if you work in construction, please take this to anyone above, and if you're in an industry, if you get no positive response from your bosses, please unionize, because we need more people saying no to building more when we should be retrofitting things. It saves between 50 and 75% of the carbon to retrofit than to build anew. We've known this for decades. So we need to stop. And what does a construction and housing sector look like in the UK if we do this? It looks like stewardship. It looks like using our imaginations within a budget. It looks like care. It looks like compassion. So we are going to surpass that budget on our current course by 2026. And again, this is no headline. So I would please invite everyone to make a lot of noise to everyone doing buildings around you and people you're working with, because this one is incredibly important. And just a little bit of kind of, when you work in construction or you're working in otherwise, what makes kind of shifting behavior is difficult. We need to recognize that. It does not happen overnight. It takes lots of different things because there are lots of factors that influence the decisions people make. One thing we can change is how we present information. So festivals like this, which make it open invitations to learn, to share, we need more of these. But we can also create the kind of conducive environments and infrastructures to have these conversations. It need not be in the building centre, it could be on your street, in your neighbourhood, in your library, in a local cinema, it could be absolutely anywhere, but we need conversations. But also we need new norms. We need to normalise resistance to a culture of uncare that is killing people. And we'll talk about that more with our fantastic panel soon. But what does retrofit look like in terms of storytelling? So back where I'm from in Glasgow, there was an incredibly good retrofit carried out on a multi-storey block of flats dated from the 60s. So they've developed a methodology where nobody has to be decanted whatsoever. This can happen without disrupting anyone's lives. And a man did not have to turn his heating on for 2 years. Now, I want to invite the room to imagine what your life would be like if you had not been worrying about your heating bill for 2 years. All of that stress, all of those worries, all of those deciding, is it cold enough yet? Shall I put on another jumper? All of that can be addressed through retrofitting homes. And again, we have all the solutions. We know what we're doing. Anyone who tells you we don't know what we're doing has an agenda, and that agenda likely coincides with oil and gas. So I've timed this well and remembered my slides. So Barnabas Calder is an architectural historian who corrected the age-old term form follows function, because it absolutely does not. Form follows power. So our buildings are not that phrase of Winston Churchill's, that we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. No, we don't. That is pacification at its bluntest. Buildings are shaped by building regulations, by power, by speculative investment, by culture, by available infrastructure, which we'll get to soon as well, but also by developing in a country in the UK where cheap oil has been available for decades. We have not built homes to the standards they could be. We have allowed things to be built that did not be. And we now have an oil field, which is an active open ecocide and is a crime against humanity. The Rosebank oil field is a crime. And to call it anything less is to be dishonest with ourselves and the people it's going to harm. So the infrastructure we build affects the housing we build as well. So form-following fuel means that because we've been using this cheap oil, your home is inefficient. Your home has not been looked after. You might have noticed molds and other problems, and one of the reasons this has been happening, cheap oil and cheap energy has allowed us to make inefficient buildings comfortable. When you make that expensive, living in an inefficient building is expensive. It's not comfortable anymore. That has been an illusion. And because of we're seeing energy companies raising profits and the massive multi-billion profits made by the likes of Shell and BP at the expense of people's lives. Remember, 11,000 people in the UK died because of cold homes last year, over winter. So people died and they made billions of pounds of profits, and their windfall taxes are not enough. We need significantly more. But we got some good news. So you might have heard lots of reports coming out about how many jobs would retrofit create. So these have been done within the confines of an imagination that looks at what we do today. So we're very, very fortunate. The Passive House Trust decided to look at the numbers in relation to what we need to do, not what we think is possible within our current economic system. So in 2020, we needed to retrofit one home every 35 seconds. And if we want to hit that net zero target, we need to employ 2 million people. For context, that's half the size of the NHS. Oh yeah, I'll speed this up. So I'll get on to the last slide. So 2 million people in the NHS. And to put this into context, this is a slide I'd also like everyone to remember. So there are 26,000 people directly employed by oil and gas in the UK. 26,000. For every one job in oil and gas, there are 3 jobs in clean energy. And that's quite good. For every one job in oil and gas, there are 77 jobs just in domestic retrofit that need to be done. So there's millions of people needing to be employed. And for context, those figures are now 3 years out of date. And we're in a worse situation today than we were when this was done. So I think I have just wrapped up. So as a kind of open invitation, as our lovely panelists join me, apologies if I lost track of time, my time blindness is quite bad. But in their book, The Dispossessed, Ursula K. Le Guin's character Shevik says, you cannot buy the revolution, so we cannot just buy that perfect insulation or heat pump. You cannot make the revolution, so you can't kind of design it. You can only be the revolution. It is in your spirit or it is nowhere. And this is an open invitation to, once we've kind of had a chat, we're going to start inviting you to take part. Instead of a Q&A, we're going to do invitations to action. So if I could be joined by our panel, and we will get things rolling in that regard as well. But thank you very much for pairing with me. Right, so just to kick off, I'm just going to pass the mic along and just introduce yourself to kind of, and also your why. What made you take the action you do? So, yeah, as and which you please, and we'll just jump in with yourself.
My name is Cameron. I mostly campaign with Insulate Britain, and I now campaign with Just Stop Oil. I've worked on buildings, and I've seen that they're not being done right, and so I saw a campaign that was going to really, really bring that to mass public attention, and that's why I got involved with Insulate Britain.
Yeah, hi, my name's Senaka, Senaka Weeraman. I've been working with a lot of campaigns to stop demolition of council estates, particularly in Lambeth. It's good to see a few campaigners in the audience. I've also been a part of UVW-SAW, trying to encourage especially young architectural assistants to realize what their rights are, to stop working overtime and not getting paid for it. And on the architectural front, I've been trying to get residents to develop their own people's plans in response to the regeneration stroke gentrification of their communities. And together with groups like Architects of Social Housing and campaign groups like Save Central Hill and Save Crescent Gardens.
Thanks. My name is Sam Griffiths. I'm a recovering branding designer, and I now I set up my own business to run community projects and kind of creative workshops. I've got a big interest in using public space and inviting people to be imaginative and bringing people together. But then last summer, 40 degrees hit, and I just had like a profound insight into the future of my son. He's 13 at the moment. And from that point on, I started taking action with Just Stop Oil. And it's been a really interesting ride, and it's been like I've learned a lot. I maybe get a chance to speak about that a bit later, but yeah, that's what spurred me into action. And do I have 1 minute? Yeah. So I just wanted to build on what Quato was saying earlier. I think I really resonated what he said around 40 degrees, climate change, migration coming, the lack of mitigation from government. And I just wanted to build on his ask where he was asking us to ask our politicians to care. And I don't think it's time for that now. We have to demand it. And I think that's what we're doing with direct action. And I'll hand it over now. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very much where I'm coming from too. I'm Grace. I'm part of Housing Rebellion. I've been involved in sort of grassroots direct action housing campaigns for about 25 years. But like most people, I started to worry about the end of the world a few years ago and got involved with Extinction Rebellion. And so Housing Rebellion is a kind of what seems an obvious marriage of these two movements, bringing climate campaigners and housing campaigners together, and really drawing the connections that we're all essentially fighting the same system. Behind the housing crisis, the climate crisis, it's the same problem we're battling, which is just a complete lack of democratic control. Everything's for profit, and just what we build, how we build, where we build it. How we live, the land. How do we get back that control? So the whole ethos of Extinction Rebellion and direct action, taking action where the problem is, completely fits with fighting on the housing crisis as well. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you very much. So we're going to try and stick with lived experience kind of quite heavily as well. So just as a kind of next kind of provocation and invitation, what is kind of one story that sticks with you from your campaigning? So from the work you've done, the things you've been involved in, what stands out to you the most? What moment kind of embodies the sort of action you think we need to be taking? But also, what did you kind of feel that personally? So we'll just go back along the opposite way as well.
I'll give an example from the very first campaign I got involved in housing. This was 25 years ago. I was a socialist standing in an election, and somebody came to me and said they were being evicted, and could I help? And my socialist thing kicked into gear, and I said, okay, well, let's fight, let's stop this eviction. And we put leaflets around the estate next to where the man was being evicted, asking people to come and stand with him. And it was a sort of a theoretical belief that people would come and support it, but it actually happened. People came, and they came and stood with him, and we resisted, and then the eviction never happened, and we ended up just staying, and we stayed round the clock for weeks, and we built a massive campaign, and we ended up marching and demanding that the council buy the block where he lived, which was a developer was evicting them to redevelop the site, and we won. And that doesn't happen very often, but it won, and it was people power, and it was community organising and resistance and fighting back against just this developer juggernaut that didn't care about the people who lived there, and that really set me up forever, really, about believing that people, if we get organised and we fight back, we can change things, and that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks. I think I started taking action with Just Stop Oil back in October last year, and we had a march on October the 2nd, and we went down to Waterloo Bridge, and we very quietly sat down, and some people were lying down, and it was very eloquent and very quiet, and this was the first time I'd ever done anything like this, and I just had maybe 20 minutes as people just stood their ground or sat down and just took that space to think about, at the same time, people were being warned that they would be arrested and moved off the bridge. But I had 20 minutes to think, what am I going to do here? And what my place was here, and what could I step into, and what was I comfortable doing? And I was profoundly moved by the people there was a couple who work in the NHS, and they were just hugging quietly, and it was just so moving seeing people who collectively were really choosing to see what's happening that we are on the brink of collapse and accepting it and taking action in light of it. And I just felt I could be part of that. And so I stayed and I was arrested. And for me, it was, I know everyone can make this step, and it's a lot easier for some people who are white, middle class, fairly non-threatening. So it's like, I have a very different arrest experience to other people, perhaps. But for me, it was hugely empowering because it showed me that I could stand in the way of harm, or in that instance, actually sit in the way of harm. And I could stand up to the state, which is criminally just negligent. It's the things that are happening right now with Rosebank being licensed, the walk back on climate policy, it's just beggars belief. But I think we have to accept that the Labour Party aren't going to save us when they come into power. It's us. We have to do it. And it was that was a moment where I realised we collectively have that power.
Okay, there are a few things. The first one, I was in Sri Lanka when the tsunami struck. But fortunately, like, my immediate family weren't affected. But I was working in architectural practice, which then started to develop like plans to help with the next stages. And so when I saw that, I thought, oh, okay, then we can start planning our futures. But then when the politics and money came in and corruption, then you kind of saw all these like ideas just completely, all those good ideas just completely get, pardon the pun, but like washed away, which is a very bad legacy for everyone who was affected by the tsunami. But it did politicize. It did politicize me. It did show how the mental health of people everywhere gets affected. How people are. And so this is when I'm going to end on a more positive note. But it is quite depressing when your homes are affected by. Not just by natural causes, but like outside forces. And every single person I've met in the housing campaigns that I've been involved with, it just wears everyone down, right? So one positive thing I can say from that is the networks and, for example, the WhatsApp groups that I look at my phone every morning and there's like 60, 70, 80 messages. And that in a way helps others who are going through a hell of a lot of stuff which you never think that you'd be in. But that's one way of, like, as you were saying, we have to do these things for ourselves. Because it's just... It's just wearing a lot of people down. So yeah, the networks, that's a positive thing.
On the 3rd of May this year, a new amendment to the Public Order Bill came out, which was like anything more than minor disruption constitutes that they can issue a Section 12 and arrest you and the rest of it. So I decided to take a little walk between 10 Downing Street and Parliament at a snail's pace because this is bullshit. And I think that's the best place to be on that day. And so when the police issued the Section 12, I just kept very, very slowly walking until I was arrested. And there was a lady on the pavement who had been watching all of this. And she was really emotional seeing it. She was really, really crying. And she was uttering thank you. And then she pulled out a Star of David necklace around her neck, and there was just this real understanding of that we are being oppressed by the state, and she has a real heartfelt attachment to what that has been like for her ancestors, perhaps her parents. It was just really powerful. And then last week I was in court for that trial, and I won because the judge perhaps liked my suit. I had burnt all my suit and written some of the countries that had experienced wildfires this summer. But she felt the police were overreaching and it was not proportional. So that's encouraging for anyone who'd like to walk really slowly on the road with Just Stop Oil.
Thank you very much. So we're going to spin your usual question and answer format. So we're going to go along again, but this is going to be more along the lines of allyship. So how can you support people directly resisting? But also, what would it look like if we built the kind of generative infrastructure? So the first kind of wonder is, how can people show up for you, if not alongside you, supporting power with? But also, what would your day look like if your demand was met? So if your demand was met, what would you, not what else you'd be doing with your time, but how would that affect your life? And then after that, we're going to have invitations from the audience. So we've had mentioned there's some campaigns for saving buildings. If you're from a campaign who wants people directed to you, we're going to ask for some hands up. So we're just going to go along again. So what does allyship look like? How can people support your campaign? If they can't stand beside you, what can they be doing just in their life? And again, we are recognizing that everyone's experience of the world is different, and especially people's treatment by the police, and especially the Metropolitan Police. So we know this, so we can't just say, get on the road. We're just going to put that line there, just for politeness sake. But what does allyship mean to you? What does it mean? We've heard a few stories. What does it mean when people show up? And how can they amplify your demand and support similar campaigns? So we'll go on again. And once we hit the end, if you want to invite people to help you, if you want support, raise your hand when we hit the end, and we'll start throwing this microphone. Metaphorically, I'll pass it into the audience to take kind of invitations from you as well.
So Insulate Britain's demand was taken on by Just Stop Oil, which is now the main civil resistance movement in the UK, which is part of this A22 network all around the world, sharing resources and experience. And Sam will talk more on what Just Stop Oil is doing. And so Insulate Britain, you know, it was a short campaign. It really brought something to the public's attention, and now all parties have something to say on insulation. And the Great British Insulation Scheme was nearly called Insulate Britain. There was a leak from the room where they were like, oh, we'll call it the Insulate Britain. And no. What I would say is get into building, like become a carpenter or like something practical. It's like hugely fulfilling to see your work in a really like physical way at the end of the day. Today I've been hauling like triple glazed windows around up and down buildings. Like some days it's really not so great, but like it is a really, really rich job, and I would particularly invite women to come and join it. Like it's a really toxic masculine environment, and I think if there was like a female in that room, they just wouldn't talk that way. Like this new crew I just joined, like I was actually sick at the end of the week. Like it's disgusting. And like, I've got a recycling bin now. I'm like getting there with them. But like, it would just really help to have more people that care about natural build materials, about these things, just come and get involved in like a hands-on way. So find a way to like skill up in a practical way.
We should grow concrete as well, right? Yeah. Well, yeah, so I would urge, there are quite a few architects in the room, engineers, get involved in a local housing campaign. There are a lot of residents who need your skills and advice. It's a way of like, actually being part of the Essential Hill campaign actually made me understand what community actually, like the real meaning of it. We kind of like use it quite flippantly sometimes. So that's something which I would encourage quite a few architects, because there are quite a few council estates under threat of demolition. I would also like urge, because there are issues as well, so we need to try and find a way of funding and making sure that these projects are taken seriously by councils as well. So we just need to like keep on pushing and support and pushing campaigns like, supporting campaigns like Save Crescent Gardens and Central Hill as well. And there will be a few others which are going to come up in the next years.
I want to say first, the work you're doing, there's profound ideas and insights, and all of that is hugely valuable, and bringing them together and networking is very powerful. You have your work. I think there is other work I'd invite you to do as well, which is to stand in civil resistance and stand in the way of harm. We are seeing profound harms around the world. We face the worst risks we have ever faced as a species. And we have to, it's not being acknowledged in the media where we are. You know, we are risking collapse. That means the end of society. So I would invite you to just really sit with that emotionally and intellectually. Like, what does that mean? For me, what motivates me is, food supply. We've seen what has happened to Spain and Greece. Greece lost a huge section of its breadbasket in the recent floods. This is at 1.2-ish degrees. We're going to go through 1.5 soon. We're heading to 2 within 2030. What is the point where all these pressures are too much for our social systems to maintain themselves? We really have to wrestle with this reality. And I think this is the risk. This is what keeps me up at night, but this is what inspires action. So I go out on the road because I fear for my son's future. I fear that our children, before they reach our age, are going to be starving, if I'm really honest with you. And this is the risk we're facing. And we just have to be honest and say those things. It feels like in this society at the moment, they're unsayable. We have to say them, we have to face them. And I think the way of facing it is by coming together collectively. We don't take action because we all feel that we're individuals, and as individuals, we can't affect anything, but we can. We don't be one person, is what I'm saying. So be part of us, or whatever movement that is taking real meaningful action. I would love to invite you to march with us. We're going to be marching from October 29th for the next few weeks after that. You'd be very welcome to join us. That will be arrestable. And I know that's a big step for people, but it will be arrestable. But there's all sorts of ways to support our work that is non-arrestable. There are many volunteer roles. There are lots of support roles, working in police station support, enabling, putting up people in accommodation. There's a lot you can do to be an ally for this movement that doesn't risk arrest. But I do think, just going back to Waterloo Bridge, there's a profound meaning to stepping into arrest and standing up to what this state is doing. And that's...
Well, yeah, I just want to 100% endorse what you're saying. I do think we need to understand that the system we're in is entirely rigged against us. We will not win or change anything by playing by the rules of the system as it is in place at the moment. We have to be prepared to step outside of what's allowed, what's legal, what's meant, how we're supposed to, wait for the next election to sort everything out. It's not going to work, and we do have to be prepared to step up into direct action. And what we're trying to do with Housing Rebellion is find those forms of direct action which people can engage in where they live, defending their homes, being, resisting, losing this respect for private property, right? Just because the housing association owns all these properties, why should they be allowed to leave them empty? What gives them the right to leave houses empty when people need homes and we need to retrofit them? We are not just dealing with lack of political will or uncare. We're dealing with people who are actively trying to stop us from retrofitting homes, leaving them empty, building new developments that we can't afford environmentally or financially. There are really serious vested interest players that we need to challenge, and we need to be prepared to take direct action to do that. So, like in the Lesners estate, which is one of the estates being demolished in Thamesmead, we've been campaigning with the residents, and we took over an empty house, and that's illegal, but we didn't get arrested, because what are they going to do? How are they going to justify that they're leaving those houses empty? We took it over and occupied it for 3 days to use as a space for residents on the estate to organise, to talk to more people about why we need to challenge Peabody, challenge the Housing Association, fight for the right to retrofit this estate, because that's what the residents there are facing. Their homes are going to be demolished if they don't fight back. So we're putting ourselves in with communities who have got these, who are fighting back, and we're saying we're willing to put ourselves on the line. We're willing to take direct action. We're willing to occupy buildings. We're willing to resist evictions. We're willing to support people who refuse to leave when they make them leave so they can demolish their homes. And if they refuse to leave, we need to be standing there with them to fight any attempt to evict them. So there's lots of forms of direct action, but it does mean stepping up and saying, I don't respect your right because you own this land to do what you like with it. And say, we can organise, we can fight back, and collectively maybe have a chance. All right, thank you.
Great. So, do we have anyone in the audience currently taking part in a campaign or is organising to? So we're going to pass to yourself first. Would you like to kick us off? And just thank you very much to all of our panelists for being so honest and sharing your life experiences, because it is kind of shied away from in kind of society to say, this is what I believe in, this is what I'm doing. So much gratitude for your contributions. So could we have another round of applause before we go?